Imagine yourself in a quiet room, the dim glow of a candle brushing the walls with soft, shifting shadows. While the air around you feels warm, yet fresh enough to let your body gradually release the tension carried throughout the day. The sound of your own breathing becomes a soothing rhythm, and your heartbeat feels like a distant bell chiming steadily. In this place, there is nothing urgent, no obligations pressing upon you. Only the chance to let go of the noisy, burdened world outside. Let your body lean back. Let your eyes grow heavy. And imagine each word reaching you as a gentle whisper guiding you deeper into calm serenity. These words are not meant to be chased, not meant to be remembered, but to be allowed to flow. Like a small stream carrying fallen leaves, slowly leading you toward a place where sleep is not an interruption, but a loyal companion awaiting you. In this space of imagination, we will walk together, tracing the faint paths of history, full of mystery, yet delivered gently so your heart feels at ease, and your mind can quietly accept each detail without resistance. Let this imagination guide you. Let every image become a lull that stirs drowsiness. For this journey is not meant to awaken, but to lull you into peaceful sleep, calm and filled with a curiosity that is never fully answered. Take a slow breath, let the air fill your chest, then release it gently, as if the world outside no longer needs to be noticed. Here, you are not asked to analyze, not asked to weigh, not asked to choose, only asked to listen, to feel, and to let these words become a background sound guiding you further away from restlessness. Each sentence is like a layer of fog, thickening, closing your view of the noisy real life. The more the fog descends, the less you see of the outer world, until finally all that remains is yourself and the story we are entering. This story is not urgent to understand. It comes like a night song, like the sound of insects in the grass, present but not demanding attention. And precisely by not trying to understand, you will sink deeper into it, because your mind will release the burden of interpretation and let your body respond with relaxation. Then your eyes grow heavier. Your eyelids feel as if called by the earth, asking to close and let shadows dance behind them. In this state, we open a door of imagination, a door that does not lead to answers, but instead leads to a soft curiosity, a long journey filled with whispers of history, where we are only observers who do not judge, only noting, only listening, and letting time itself move the flow. Like hearing a fairy tale told by an old grandmother sitting by the fireplace, you only sit and listen while your heart drifts slowly, and sleepiness draws nearer. Here our journey begins, calmly, without haste, and without a truly clear ending. The year we are about to enter is a year long swallowed by time, a year when the world was still cloaked in uncertainty, when humans lived with the simple belief that fate was determined by the sky, by the earth, by something they could not fully understand. Imagine stepping into the mid-14th century, a time when the Black Death had shaken Europe to the core of its life. Villages disappeared from the maps, cities fell silent, highways once filled with merchants now lay empty. Only wild grass dared to grow among the cracked stones. Yet amidst the devastation that seemed to sweep across the continent, there was a small region that appeared to refuse to collapse. Standing tall against the deadly grip, a place whose name is rarely mentioned in official records, and precisely because of that, it lures us. For behind the silence of the archives, there is always space for mystery to take root. This small town lay between mountains and dense forests, hidden from the main trade routes, not as large as the famed city centers, not as strong as the fortresses of kingdoms. Yet precisely because of its seclusion, it seemed to withstand the storm that struck. Imagine its entrance as only a winding, stony path, as if nature itself had crafted the protection. And inside, its society lived in ways that appeared simple, yet not entirely ordinary. For they carried customs and order, unlike the villages around them. They kept their distance from outsiders, restricted who could enter. And though from the outside it seemed like fear, from within it appeared as a form of strict discipline. An order that made many historians later whisper whether the town was simply fortunate or whether something deeper guarded them. Here is where our story begins. When the world was engulfed in death, yet one place stood firm like an island, refusing to sink. And from the emptiness of information itself arose the suspicion that something hidden had grown there. Something perhaps older than the plague itself and darker than mere disease. Now imagine we stand at the threshold of that town. The year recorded is around 1349. When most of Europe could no longer count the number of corpses piled in open fields. When the bells of death tolled almost every hour in the great cities, yet here no such bell was heard. There were no long processions leading people to mass graves, no stench of rotting flesh saturating the air. What could be heard were only birds daring to sing in the trees. And what could be seen were only thin smoke trails rising from the hearths of wooden houses, as if the outside world had never truly touched them. The town stood in a valley enclosed by natural stone cliffs. Its road narrow, allowing only one cart to pass at a time. From a distance, it looked small, but once inside, there was a sense of space. With wooden houses neatly aligned along the main street, each house had small windows and steep roofs, seemingly built to endure long winters. At the center stood a stone building older than all the houses around it, its shape simple yet strange, without a cross, without any clear religious symbol, only thick stone walls and an iron door that always seemed locked. The inhabitants called it the meeting hall, but there were whispers that its function was deeper than a place for discussion. For not everyone could enter. Only a few trusted ones, while others could only whisper outside, trying to guess what was spoken within. Curiously, though they lived in isolation, there were no signs of famine. Their fields remained green. Their livestock stayed healthy, even when in other villages cattle dropped dead without cause. Here none dared touch them. And that was what gave rise to many tales, whether they possessed secret knowledge of certain remedies, or whether they practiced something more unsettling, something never written in ink, but passed on through ritual. For though the place seemed peaceful, outsiders always felt a chill upon entering. It's as if eyes were watching from behind the windows, as if something was hiding beneath the calm. And historians writing of them later asked, could a town survive merely by luck? Or was there an unwritten law guarding their existence? Year after year passed, and while other towns in Europe drowned in immeasurable grief, this small valley endured, and the few surviving records describe it as a town untouched, though only a handful of travelers or merchants ever dared to enter. Most of them left accounts filled with wonder, for how could a town lying not far from the main trade routes remain standing without scars, without mass graves, without the signs of a plague that swept away entire populations nearby? Historians later tried to find the answer. Some claim that the valley's geography created a kind of natural isolation, the cold air and the rushing river supposedly keeping away the plague-bearing rats. Others suspected that the inhabitants performed certain rituals whenever the seasons changed, burning bitter herbs whose smoke filled the narrow streets of the town, so that whatever came from outside could not cross that invisible boundary, the record of a monk from a nearby abbey. Even mentioned that he once saw a strange red glow radiating from the valley at night, not from ordinary fire, but more like the flicker of an aurora fallen from the sky. And he wrote with hesitation that perhaps the town was guarded by something beyond words. Yet in the end, he closed his account with a simple phrase: "No one knows the truth. No one can be certain of what truly happened behind those cliffs." What was clear was that in the midst of great chaos, there appeared one place that seemed to refuse destruction. And from this emerged the whisper that behind the iron door of that old stone hall, a secret society was born, formed not only to protect themselves from the plague, but also to preserve knowledge that must never fall into careless hands. Knowledge that perhaps could save humanity or destroy it if ever it escaped its place. Imagine for a moment how life inside that town unfolded. The narrow streets built of river stones still echoed with footsteps, even while the world outside was besieged by death. Every morning came the sound of heavy wooden doors opening slowly. The scent of bread baked in stone ovens drifted through the cold air, and the murmur of a small river winding between houses seemed a reminder that life still carried on. Women in thick wool garments arranged baskets of grain, beans, and dried fruit in the market, while men hauled firewood from the small forest at the cliff's edge. Children still ran about carrying pieces of wood they carved into simple toys. Even the small bell in the church tower rang each evening. As if nothing had changed yet, behind this activity lay something different. People rarely spoke of the outside world. They seldom mentioned other towns, as if their place was the last world left breathing. No one asked what happened beyond the valley. No one dared speak of the numbers of the dead across the continent. And within this silence, subtle signs of something deeper appeared. For each night when the sun had set, the oil lamps in every house were extinguished. At the same time, only the great bonfire in the square remained lit. And around that fire gathered a group of people whose faces were veiled with thin black cloth. They sat in a circle, silent, nodding their heads occasionally. There were no songs, no loud prayers, only long silence, and to anyone watching, the gathering looked like an ancient habit that could not be explained, as though there was an unwritten law binding them. All a law not carved in stone, but planted within their own blood, a law that kept them alive while separating them from the outside world that crumbled slowly. By day, the town appeared calm, like any ordinary settlement. Yet upon closer attention, small peculiar habits emerged. For instance, in the market, everyone always traded goods for goods. Almost no silver or gold coins passed between hands, even though in those days money was precious. The merchants seemed to hold an unspoken pact to avoid the circulation of coin, and any outsider fortunate enough to enter that market would feel cold stares when trying to pay with metal currency, as though such objects were deemed unclean or cursed. Then at night, when the great bonfire in the square was lit once more, all daily conversations vanished. People sat quietly within their homes or walked slowly toward the square without a word. Even the dogs rarely barked at that hour. Only the sound of footsteps upon stone streets echoed faintly. Around the fire, grown men stood forming the outer ring, while women and children sat in the inner circle, and among them was an old man in a tattered robe who always carried a dark, wooden staff. He was called the guide. He never spoke loudly, only lifted his staff slightly, and all heads bowed. At times he muttered indistinct words in a tongue no longer known, a language perhaps preserved only by oral tradition. And each time those words were spoken, the people of the circle seemed to feel something heavy, not fear, but a kind of connection with what could not be seen, as though the words formed a subtle shield above the town, protecting them from the wave of death wandering outside, and though no one ever admitted it openly, everyone knew the secret of this town was bound to that custom. A custom that to outsiders might appear terrifying, yet for them was the only reason they still endured while the world around them collapsed. The guide always appeared each night, his face deeply lined, his eyes dim yet piercing, as though guarding a secret that could never be fully explained in words. The townsfolk believed he had lived far longer than natural, for some of the oldest inhabitants claimed to have seen him since their childhood, and his appearance had scarcely changed. Only his hair and beard had grown whiter. Some thought he was once a healer who had traveled far to the eastern lands. Others whispered he had been a monk expelled from a monastery for asking forbidden questions. Yet no one truly knew, and none dared to ask. Each time he raised his staff and drew a line upon the earth with its tip, the people gathered closer. They closed their eyes and listened to his softly flowing words. It was said he always repeated the same phrase, a phrase whose literal meaning none could grasp, yet was believed to carry protection. Those who once tried to mimic its sound felt as though their throats seized, as though an unseen layer refused their voices. So they ceased their attempts. Only the guide could speak it without obstruction. And from this belief grew the conviction that the town stood beneath his guardianship. No stone gate, no soldiers, only an old voice maintaining unseen boundaries. And what was more startling, even when strangers sometimes entered the town, whether wanderers or lost traders, they never carried the plague with them, as if the very first step onto the cobbled path leading to the square cleansed the sickness from their bodies. Whether this was coincidence or the doing of the guide, none could know. Yet the sense of safety made the town unlike any other, where death haunted daily life, and thus this secret sank deeper, more unreachable, a subject of whispers that spread both curiosity and fear. The days in that town flowed with a rhythm untouched by the chaos of the outside world. Each morning, when a thin mist still clung between the rooftops of stone and timber houses, people stepped out of their doors with slow yet steady steps. They made their way to the old well in the square to fetch water, and curiously, no one was ever seen in a hurry. As though time in this town moved more slowly, children ran along the narrow, cobbled lanes, their laughter echoing softly. Yet always ceased the instant the sound of the guide's staff struck the stone, as though they knew each strike was a signal, not a harsh warning, but a rhythm that kept the town breathing in the corners of houses. Women hung dark-dyed cloths to dry, in shades of brown, black, and gray. Rarely were bright colors seen, as if the town deliberately rejected anything dazzling. Even the meals they prepared were simple. Coarse bread, thick porridge from grains, and small pieces of dried vegetables. Meat was rare, reserved only for the seldom celebrations. Though plain, none complained. They ate in silence, sitting together by the hearth, sharing without many words. A stranger who once stayed briefly in the town told that he never heard shouting, no quarrels, no loud bargaining in the market, only whispers and quiet talk. Even the animal sounds seemed subdued, as though the town was wrapped in a veil that muffled all noise. Among these customs, one stood out as more mysterious. Each time the sun set, no one dared light a fire outside their homes. All flames were hidden behind walls, and the streets were left in total darkness. Only the guide's footsteps and staff occasionally echoed, moving through every alley. For what purpose, none could say. Perhaps to ensure no one broke the unwritten rule. And so the night passed in thick silence, leaving the impression that this town not only survived the plague, but sealed itself away from the world in ways understood only by those within. The small market in that town was never lively, not even on days thought to be its busiest. The only sounds were the scuff of leather sandals on stone and the rustle of cloth as hands picked up and set down goods plain. Tables stood neatly in rows, draped with worn fabric that had been used for years. Atop them lay hard bread, dried grains, and clay pots filled with sharp-scented herbs, difficult to identify. There were salted fish hanging under the wooden awnings, but not many, and several rolls of dark candles, nearly black, as if even their light was required to submit to the town's ever-present darkness. No haggling was heard, no cries from merchants, only the gentle exchange between buyer and seller. Often they simply traded goods without a word, and to a stranger watching from afar, the market would seem more like a ceremony than a place of commerce. In one corner of the market stood a small building with a heavy wooden door that was always shut. Many believed that behind it something was kept, perhaps old records or relics not meant for just any eyes. Some claimed to have seen a guide enter, carrying a roll of cloth covered in symbols, leaving again. Without a single word, no one dared to ask for in this town. Any question was thought to risk disturbing something better left asleep. Yet children sometimes hid beneath the merchants' tables, peering through cracks, and whispered to each other about a faint light they had once seen slipping from the seams of that heavy wooden door, as though the market was not merely a place of trade, but the center of something greater, something that made this town different from the others that had crumbled under the plague. A secret that grew between stacks of hard bread and rolls of dark cloth. When night fell and the market stood empty, the streets that had been filled with slow footsteps turned desolate, accompanied only by the wind slipping between the cold. Stone buildings, the merchant tables, were left in place covered with worn cloth that looked darker beneath the moonlight. The dark candles once offered in the day were no longer visible, either carried away or hidden somewhere unknown. Some townsfolk believed night was not the time for humans to linger at the market, for then something else walked among the wooden stalls. Shadows without owners, or faint footsteps heard without a body. At times, crows perched on the roof of the building with the heavy wooden door, staring down with dim red eyes before flying off. When someone dared to pass, though only for a moment, the creak of a door was sometimes heard, but no one admitted to opening it. No one admitted to entering. A faint light, too, was said to slip from the cracks of the wood. Not like candle flame, but more like a gentle glow that moved like mist. If anyone dared to peek, they saw only darkness, as though the light appeared only to those who did not seek it. Vanishing when pursued, the night at the market seemed to carry a pulse of secrecy, unlike the day. Not simply a town resting from its daily life, but something deliberately guarding the bond that held the place to its mystery, and everyone returning home through the market always walked. Faster heads lowered, as if avoiding an unseen gaze, afraid that, if they lingered too long, they would hear whispers not spoken by any human mouth. The houses surrounding the town market appeared ordinary by day, with rough stone walls overgrown with pale green moss, and small windows half open to let the light in. Yet upon closer observation, there was something strange about how the houses faced one another, as if they had been deliberately built around the town center at equal distances, forming an imperfect circle that could only be noticed from above. Some walls bore faint carvings, almost erased by time, shapes resembling a dangled stars or circles converging at a single point. Some villagers thought them merely children's scratches or marks left by old stonemasons, but others believed they were ancient symbols handed down from those who lived here before the plague. And each house seemed to hold its own fragment of a larger puzzle on certain nights. When the wind blew gently, soft knocking could be heard behind windows, 3 times repeated, not loud, just enough for the sleepless to notice. Some families chose to bolt their doors tight and light a small fire in the hearth to ward off the creeping cold. Yet others left their doors unlocked. As though awaiting something from outside, a small light had sometimes been seen drifting from one house to another, moving silently like a torch without a bearer, only a glow gliding slowly, pausing at a door, then vanishing at once. And those who lived in these houses never spoke of what truly happened. They only stared silently when asked, with eyes deeper than words could explain, as if carrying a secret forbidden to be revealed aloud. By day, the town's life appeared calm like other small towns, still struggling to forget the fears of the past. The market remained lively, with merchants offering vegetables, hard bread, coarse cloth, and salted meat hanging high under wooden roofs. Children ran between the legs of adults, carrying small stones or sticks as toys. The sound of horses pulling carts echoed repeatedly. Yet upon closer observation, there was always a pattern behind this busyness, as if every movement of the townsfolk was guided by an unseen rhythm. Certain vendors always arranged their goods in even numbers: 4 loaves of bread, 6 bundles of vegetables, 8 rolls of cloth, rarely did anyone dare sell in odd amounts. Buyers, too, sometimes bargained, not merely for price, but to alter the number of items to match certain figures. In the afternoon, as the sun leaned west, a group of women often gathered by the old well seldom used. They carried empty jars, not to fetch water, but only to place them briefly on the well's edge before carrying them home. No one ever explained the reason for this habit, as though it was understood collectively that it was part of something greater. At night, after everyone returned home and the streets grew silent, the town did not truly sleep. Behind house windows, candlelight lingered longer than usual. Shadows of figures moved slowly, not like ordinary conversations, but like hands exchanging signs. The town lived in two worlds, one bright with daily routines, the other hidden in silence, each covering the other as though the first layer was only a thin mask for something older and deeper that wished not to be known by the outside world. If one had the chance to enter the houses of the townsfolk, behind the simplicity of rough wooden furniture and packed earth floors, objects could be found that seemed out of place with daily needs. On the dining tables often lay small stones shaped almost perfectly round, placed in clay vessels, always in even numbers, usually 2 or 4. There were also worn cloth rolls not used as clothing but folded neatly in a corner of the room, sometimes bearing faint patterns resembling circles with broken lines inside. Beneath wooden beds were often stored fragments of animal bones bleached by time, never discarded, as though carrying meaning known only to their owners. On the walls of some homes, small wooden pieces bore simple carvings, intersecting straight lines, not forming a clear picture, but seeming to follow a pattern. These objects were never openly discussed. No one dared to ask their use. Even guests pretended not to notice, as if bound by an unspoken rule preserving silence. Yet every family possessed such items, differing in form but sharing similar design. They were kept like private treasures, though not for sale or inheritance. They resembled keys more than ornaments, though no one knew what door they guarded. And in the stillness of night, these objects were sometimes moved to different places, set on windowsills, by the hearth, or even outside the door, never explained. Only repeated gestures passed down from generation to generation, leaving the impression that in this town, every household was part of a far greater puzzle. On certain nights, when the moon appeared only as a thin crescent and the air was colder than usual, the townspeople seemed bound by a custom they never spoke of to outsiders. After midnight, one by one, the wooden doors creaked softly open, not loudly, but enough to mark movement. People stepped out with light strides, without lamps, without torches, relying only on the faint starlight piercing the thin mist. They walked slowly in the same direction, though the path wound through dry fields and low stone fences. Not a single person lost their way. Their steps seemed memorized since childhood. No conversations were heard, only the sound of feet against earth and restrained breathing. Children were rarely brought along, though some youths who were deemed old enough joined. For them that night was a silent initiation, without celebration, without congratulations. Only presence in the quiet procession threading the darkness. Once they reached an open field outside the town, they stopped in a circle, standing upright, facing one another. then bowed their heads as if in reverence to something unseen. Some brought out round stones from small vessels they carried, laying them gently on the ground, forming lines that looked uneven but followed a recurring pattern, while others placed worn cloth rolls or carved wooden pieces, each object finding its place, as though they were assembling part of a picture understood only by their lineage. No prayers spoken aloud, no songs sung, only silence deepening further, occasionally broken by the wind sweeping across the field as the only rhythm. After a span of time impossible to measure by clocks, they bowed again, then calmly walked home one by one, leaving the objects in their place, never to be taken back. As though the field was a book slowly written night after night, never finished nor read. The next morning, the field where they had gathered looked no different from an ordinary meadow. Wild grasses still grew randomly, dew clung to the tips of leaves, and a few small birds stopped to search for insects. Anyone unaware of what had occurred the previous night would pass through without paying attention. Yet upon closer observation, something faint remained. The round stones laid down the night before were not scattered haphazardly, though they appeared random from afar. Up close, they revealed a circle imperfect, but suggestive of order. The worn cloth rolls left behind were dampened by dew. Their colors faded, making it difficult to guess what meaning they once held. The carved wooden pieces were partly covered by soil, partly weighed down by dry leaves, as though those objects were deliberately allowed to merge with nature. Never cleaned, never moved, though some children playing in the field had seen them. They never dared to touch. Their parents always warned in a flat tone to keep away, offering no further explanation, only a prohibition spoken as if it was self-explanatory. Travelers passing by sometimes wondered why there were strangely arranged stones or carved wood in the middle of the meadow. Yet the townspeople always answered briefly, calling them remnants of old customs, then shifted the conversation. Thus the field remained a quiet place in daylight, left as though it were an unimportant part of the landscape, though for those who had stood there the night before, every stone and cloth left behind was a silent record, a record readable only by those who understood that what appeared simple carried layers of meaning never fully revealed. The days in that town seemed to pass with an ordinary rhythm. As if nothing strange existed, the market still opened in the morning. People carried baskets filled with vegetables, bread, or simple cloth. The voices of vendors sounded no different from those in other towns, no obvious sign of something secret. Yet upon closer observation, there was something different. The way they greeted one another was too brief, as though only to confirm each other's presence without truly showing feeling. The smiles offered were not entirely warm, more often avoided direct contact. In the blacksmith's workshop, the hammer's sound rang steadily. Yet the owner occasionally stopped to glance out the window as if awaiting something. In the bakery, the warm aroma still filled the street, yet the baker rarely spoke long with buyers. They only exchanged coins and goods and quickly parted. Even the children playing in the square formed circles to knead. There were no free-spirited shouts, as though their play itself was also a drill that must be done in a certain pattern. Travelers passing through often felt the town a little cold despite its seemingly lively scene. They assumed the townsfolk were perhaps still traumatized by the plague, perhaps still holding on to a fear that never faded. Yet those who stayed longer began to notice something behind that order, that every movement seemed guarded so as not to stray from a pattern understood only by those silently bound to something never spoken aloud. Among the rows of tightly packed wooden houses, there was one house that seemed no different from the rest. Its walls made of dark planks, long weathered by rain. Its roof covered with rough tiles, its small windows showing only candlelight at night. The house belonged to a simple family, a father who worked as a weaver, a mother who prepared herbal remedies to sell at the market, and a 10-year-old daughter often seen carrying a water jar to the well. To outsiders, the family looked ordinary. There was no sign of excess wealth or suspicious behavior. Yet upon closer observation, there was a small pattern that differed every evening when the church bell rang. The family always shut their door more quickly than their neighbors. Afterward, the candlelight within flickered with the same pattern each night. 3 times dim, then returning bright, a pattern too consistent to be chance. The daughter was often seen drawing small circles in the dirt with a twig, circles that were never left for long before she quickly erased them with her foot. Her mother rarely spoke long with other vendors. Yet sometimes she handed dried leaves to someone without asking for payment, only with a brief glance that made the recipient leave quickly. Her father, while weaving, did not only make cloth for sale. Some of his patterns carried circular lines, designs that seemed random to outsiders, yet when compared with symbols sometimes found on doors or stones outside the town, they appeared similar. All this was never spoken aloud, not even among themselves, as though there was a silent pact to keep. Something hidden, a part of a larger network, a network that moved beneath the daily bustle without ever being truly seen. And that small house was only one knot among many knots connected by invisible threads. A stranger who arrived in the town during spring, a man of about 30 years wearing worn clothing but with eyes full of vigilance, began to notice things overlooked by most. He came under the pretense of selling cloth from another region, but in truth he was an observer who had traveled from town to town searching for signs of a group that never revealed itself openly. At the market, he saw the daughter from the wooden house. The girl was buying salt with copper coins when one coin fell upon the merchant's table. The man saw a small scratch upon its surface, a scratch resembling a circle crossed by a line, a symbol he had once seen carved into the walls of a ruined village destroyed by the plague. He did not comment, only glanced briefly before pretending to arrange his rolls of cloth. The next day he walked past the wooden house, its windows shut tightly. Yet through a small crack he saw candlelight flicker, 3 times dim, then bright. The man paused, pretending to tie his shoe, his eyes still watching the shadow moving behind the dusty glass. He knew this was not a mere family habit. The following night he deliberately stayed awake. He sat at the small inn writing notes. When the church bell rang, he walked slowly to the narrow street near that house. He saw the door, usually sealed, slightly ajar, and someone slipped inside quickly. A man in a long cloak, not a local resident. His steps hurried, yet cautious. The stranger realized a meeting was being held, one carefully guarded, he dared not approach, only stood far at the corner of the street, listening to faint voices within, whispers whose words he could not make out. Yet their rhythm resembled prayer or chant. He recorded the time, the weather, even the thickness of the air that felt heavier than usual. From that night onward, he knew he had found the trace of the society he sought, something born of chaos and now hidden beneath daily routines. The stranger began to form a simple plan. He did not want to rush, for he knew secrets closely guarded were revealed not by force, but by patience. In the daytime, he continued his role as a cloth merchant, offering thin, faded rolls, smiling at housewives who only looked without buying, bowing his head to men busy discussing harvests. Yet beneath that friendly manner, he carefully observed all who passed near the wooden house. He noticed that every 3 or 4 days a stranger appeared, as if by chance, a man with a basket of fish, a woman pretending to buy oil, or a young man carrying an old book. Each stopped briefly at the door, knocked in a certain pattern, and entered, staying only a few minutes before leaving with calm faces, as though nothing had happened. The stranger noted each pattern, each face, and tried to connect these small signs with old records he carried from his travels. At night, he approached the walls of the house with light steps, pressing his ear to the damp wood, cracked by age. He heard murmurs, sometimes like prayer, sometimes like oath, and sometimes only long silence filling the room. He tried to count the pauses as if there were rules in each silence. He realized this group did not simply gather to share stories or meals, but rather to preserve something older than the town itself, something that absorbed both fear and hope since the plague had ruined this land. He wrote in his notebook that he found no clear proof of what was spoken inside. Yet he felt the same pattern as in groups he had heard of in other towns, a pattern that always left faint traces and then vanished like a shadow. He closed the book carefully, placed it under the pillow at the inn, and before sleeping whispered to himself that he might already have stepped upon a path he could never leave. The next night, after closing his notebook and trying to shut his eyes, the stranger was haunted by an unusual dream. In his sleep, he saw a dark room with damp stone walls, lit only by the dim glow of a torch flickering in rhythm with his heartbeat. At the center stood a long wooden table filled with objects he could not fully recognize. There were scrolls with burnt edges, a clay bowl containing black liquid, and a mask resembling the beak of a bird. He had never seen such an object before. Yet in the dream, he felt as though he had once touched it long ago. Around the table sat figures with blurred faces. They had no eyes or mouths, only hazy shadows that trembled like smoke. Though lacking clear form, he could feel their gaze upon him. In a long silence, they did not speak, only tapped fingers or objects on the table, creating a strange rhythm that grew faster and faster until it became an echo, vibrating in his chest. He awoke, drenched in cold sweat, his heart pounding as if he had been running. Yet the inn-room remained silent, only the sound of wind slipping through the cracks of the window. He tried to calm himself, telling his mind the dream might be nothing more than imagination stirred by curiosity. Yet the more he attempted to believe it, the stronger grew the sense that the dream was not merely a dream, but a small door opening into another layer of the secret. He was approaching. He sat at the edge of the bed, staring blankly at the cracked wooden floor. Then slowly lit a candle and reopened his notebook, adding a brief note that something was trying to communicate. Though he did not yet know how or why, that night he lay down again, but his eyes never fully closed. For he feared that if he slept once more, the dream would return in sharper form, carrying something he might not be ready to see. The next day, as the sun slowly rose behind lingering mist, the stranger walked through the narrow streets of the town with uncertain steps, still carrying the shadow of the dream in his head. And that feeling grew stronger when his eyes caught something unusual on the corner of a wall near the old church. There was a faint carving on the stone, almost erased by time. Its shape resembled a long bird's beak, much like the mask he had seen in his sleep. He stopped for a while, his fingers touching the cold, cracked surface of the stone, tracing the rough lines that formed the symbol, as if a fine thread linked the dream to reality. Some townsfolk passing by glanced at him briefly, then hurried away, as though they did not want to be seen paying attention to that mark. From their reactions, he understood that the symbol was not a random decoration, but something known only to certain people, something better hidden than spoken of. He carefully noted the discovery in his book. Though the words felt too small to contain the weight of the feeling, he continued his walk. But from that moment on, every wall, every wooden door, even the ground in the market seemed to hold patterns and marks that had escaped his eyes before. Among the shadows of trees and posts, he noticed circular scratches, broken crosses, or thin lines, etched as if deliberately. The longer he observed, the clearer it became that this town was filled with a secret language, readable only by those who knew how his curiosity deepened. Yet along with it came worry, for a language built for hiding usually carried intentions not meant to be reached by daylight. He realized one thing, that he was no longer just a casual observer, but slowly being drawn into a circle he did not fully understand. And once he stepped further, perhaps there would be no simple way back. His steps grew slower as he realized that the symbols were not scattered randomly, but arranged as if forming a path to be followed. He observed the walls, wooden fences, even the stones marking the streets. And at each place he found faint markings that seemed to guide him toward a single point. His curiosity grew stronger. Yet at the same time unease rose, for he knew not every road built by secret signs ended with the answers one hoped for. The farther he walked, the quieter his surroundings became. The bustling market was far behind now. He was on a narrower street, lined with old houses whose windows were shut tight, as though their inhabitants chose not to see anything outside. He stopped for a moment, gazing at a wooden door covered with scratches. At the bottom of the door, he found a small circle with a dot in the center, resembling an eye that watched. His heartbeat quickened. He felt as if something was waiting behind that door. Yet as he was about to touch the handle, he heard footsteps from afar. Quick and heavy, he quickly moved into the shadow of the wall. Watching closely, from the corner of the street appeared a man in a long black cloak, his face hidden beneath a hood, his stride firm and deliberate. The man stopped at the very same door, pulled out a key from his pocket, and entered without glancing around. the door closed quietly, leaving behind a thicker silence. The stranger stood for a long while in stillness. Trying to steady his breath, he realized he had just witnessed something unusual, something that might be part of the secret hidden by this town. He wrote a short note in his book, then cautiously continued his walk. The markings on the walls seemed to keep calling, leading him further inward towards something whose final shape he could not yet imagine. The night grew darker as his steps led him into a narrow alley almost entirely covered by the shadows of old houses. The air there was damp, and the scent of wet earth mingled with rotting wood lingered sharply. He lowered his gaze to the moss-covered stone floor, and then his eyes caught sight of a symbol larger than the others. A double circle with a cross at its center, its carving deeper. As though made deliberately to withstand the passing of time, the symbol was surrounded by tiny scratches resembling faint stars. The longer he looked, the more he felt the mark was not merely a guide, but a center. An axis of the network of signs he had been following all along. He sat briefly at the edge of the alley, opened his book, began copying the shape of the symbol, drawing each line carefully, as though afraid to alter the meaning hidden within. As he wrote, he heard a faint sound like whispers, not from a human mouth, but from the wind crawling through the cracks of the walls. The whispers seemed to repeat a pattern. He closed his eyes, trying to catch its meaning. But all he felt was a strange vibration in his chest, as if the symbol carried a pulse of its own. At the end of the alley, he saw a flickering dim light. Like a torch being waved, he rose cautiously, stepping slowly toward the source of the glow. And with each step, it felt as though he was moving not only into a physical space, but also into a hidden layer of the town where history and secrecy mingled, waiting to be discovered by those brave enough to keep walking. The flickering light turned out to come from a torch held by a hooded figure. Clad in black, he stood motionless at the end of the alley, as if he had known all along that someone would arrive there tonight. His robe hung long, nearly sweeping the stone floor, his face concealed beneath the hood. Only the sharp line of his jaw and the faint rhythm of steady breathing visible. The torch he held cast light against the wall, making the large symbol he had just copied glow faintly. The figure did not speak, only lifted the torch slightly higher as if signaling him to approach. Step by step, he advanced, his heartbeat quickening. Yet strangely, he felt calm. No threat lingered, only the sense that he was entering a space prepared for him. As the distance closed between them, the hooded figure shifted slightly, revealing a small wooden door along the wall, a door nearly invisible before, hidden in the shadows. Upon its surface, the same double circle with a cross was carved, only finer and deeper. The figure inclined his head gently, a gesture simple yet unmistakably an invitation to enter. He stared at the door for a long moment, sensing that whatever lay beyond was not just a room, but another layer of the town's secret. Then, with steady breath, he grasped the cold, heavy wooden handle and slowly pushed the door open. Its hinges groaned. A quiet sound, yet one that resounded like thunder in his mind, as though something long asleep had been released. The wooden door opened slowly, revealing a narrow chamber lit by small torches. Fastened to the stone walls, the air inside felt different, carrying a faint warmth mixed with the scent of incense and smoldering wood, as though this place was never truly dark nor cold. Within it stood a long stone table, its surface cluttered with ancient objects. There were scrolls tied neatly with black string, carved pieces of wood marked with the same symbols as those seen on the wall, and several small metal chalices still stained with dried red residue. Perhaps wine, perhaps something more mysterious. In the corner rested a small statue carved from soapstone, its form resembling a human, yet its face bore no eyes. Only hollow recesses that sank deep. The aura of the statue evoked calm and unease. At once the hooded figure entered after him, closing the door slowly. Then stood motionless, offering no explanation, as though everything within the chamber already spoke for itself. He stepped closer, his fingers brushing one of the scrolls, cold and rigid to the touch, as if untouched for years, yet no dust lay upon it. A sign that these relics were cared for, though rarely used. The sound of dripping water from the stone ceiling fell in rhythm, adding to the sense that time here flowed differently. Slowly he realized this chamber was not merely storage, but an altar for secret gatherings. Each object upon the table held meaning, though meaning not easily expressed in words, and in that silence he began to feel that his footsteps tonight were not chance, but part of a pattern far greater than himself. The hooded figure finally moved his thin, pale hand, reaching for the scroll at the center of the table. He untied the black string with patient care, as though every knot held meaning that must not be undone in haste. The faint sound of fabric brushing stone echoed as he lowered the scroll. Slowly, the parchment was unrolled, revealing lines of symbols inked in dark strokes, now beginning to fade. Not Latin letters familiar to most, but a series of marks resembling a mixture of stars, circles, and interwoven curves. He gazed at the symbols for a long while, then pointed to a large circle at the center, from which radiated lines in all directions, resembling a star chart, yet also like a map of roads connecting villages. He whispered softly, his voice nearly drowned by the dripping water, that this was not mere writing, but memory from the past handed down by survivors, a language understood only by the small circle who called themselves brothers in the shadows. He said this symbol mapped the safe paths when plague seized the city's roots, known only to those who pledged an oath to protect one another beyond the authority of kings and churches. The listener felt his heart tremble slightly, not from threat, but from the realization that behind the great calamity that took countless lives, a handful had woven a hidden network, a secret society preserving hope when the world seemed to collapse. The scroll shifted slightly, revealing another mark at its edge, resembling an open eye with a hollow dot at its center. And calmly, the hooded figure explained it was a symbol of remembrance, that even in darkness, there was one who saw and recorded, though never revealing its face to the world beyond. The ritual did not begin with shouts or striking sounds, but with a long silence. The hooded figure lit a small candle upon the stone table, its flame dim and trembling as if hesitant to live. Yet within that dimness, the atmosphere grew heavier. He gestured for eyes to close briefly, not in prayer to something known, but to sense the presence of what could not be seen. Then footsteps entered the chamber. One by one, shadows joined. Their number not many. Only a few with faces concealed by cloth. They sat in a circle around the table. More candles were lit until the underground room was slowly bathed in pale yellow glow. At the center of their circle, they placed simple objects. A piece of dry bread, a cup of water, a rusted dagger, and a small round stone. These objects seemed ordinary, yet in their whispers, each carried deeper meaning. Bread was memory of hunger never gone. Water, the symbol of fragile life. The dagger, sign of danger ever lurking, and the round stone, a mark of eternity. They hoped would guard them from the erasure of memory. No prayer was spoken aloud. Instead, they murmured in low tones that resembled the hum of insects in the night. The sound rising and falling, slowly merging into a rhythm that lightened the mind. The observer could only remain still, feeling a tremor in the chest, not of fear, but of awareness that in this hidden chamber, a small circle of people was weaving meaning of togetherness, while the outside world lay in ruin. No name was called, no leader exalted, only a calm circle, as if saying this secret was not for power, but for survival, and to ensure the faint flame would not be extinguished completely. When the humming sounds slowly faded, one of them began to speak in a hushed tone, his voice almost blending with the trembling of the candle flame. He retold a story said to have been passed down from mouth to mouth. A story of the night when an entire village by the river vanished within a week. No bells rang, no records written, only vague memories whispered down. The villagers fell one by one, and their homes were left half open, as if their occupants had just stepped outside for a moment. The tale was not spoken to frighten, but as a warning. For within it lay the understanding that silence was often more terrifying than screams. Then another added a fragment of a different tale, of a wanderer found mute in the fields, his eyes open, yet no longer seeing. His hands clutching tightly a small, smooth stone. No one knew where the stone came from. But from that moment, such stones began to be regarded as markers. Perhaps coincidence, perhaps sign. No one could ever be certain. The voices rotated, filling the underground chamber, weaving a network of narratives never complete, offering only fragments. Leaving gaps for the imagination of listeners, the observing figure only listened, letting the words flow like water. He could not tell what was fact and what was fable. But within that uncertainty lay its calming power for secrets, whispers, and unfinished memories seemed to build a stronger fortress than stone or sword. They protected in a different way, not through force, but by ensuring the story did not vanish, that the mystery remained alive alongside those who endured. Behind the layers of stories recited, in turn, their daily life was, in truth, never far from simplicity. Though wrapped in secrecy and unease, they still rose each morning to light fires in the hearth, to boil water, grind grains, and prepare enough food to survive no more, no less. Some tended animals, some wove cloth, others sat for hours, repairing broken tools as if nothing distinguished them from other villages. Yet everything was done with extraordinary caution. Doors were rarely left open, conversations always short. Even children were taught from early on not to speak their names aloud, so that if a stranger passed by, he would hear only indistinct voices without identity. At night, they walked softly without torches, relying only on the dim light of the moon, for fire could be a dangerous beacon. When someone fell ill, they summoned no healer from outside. Instead, relying on herbs from the forest carefully stored. And when death came, burials were silent. No bells, no loud prayers, only earth covering the body, then silence creeping back. All of this was not mere habit, but a strategy of survival passed down, for they knew the world beyond might not be ready to accept that a group still preserves stories, beliefs, and secrets from the time when the Black Death swept through. They did not know if the secret would one day be useful or a burden, but surely, as long as they lived, they would ensure the thread would not break, weaving a delicate net to hold time from tearing completely. Such was their daily life, simple on the surface, yet full of unspoken tension. When the first layer of their simple life was peeled away, something deeper appeared, something invisible to the naked eye, in a hidden chamber beneath the earth that they dug themselves. There was a place not meant to store food or tools, but to hold worn manuscripts and symbols drawn on the walls with charcoal. In that room, the air was always damp, footsteps echoed, and the stone walls felt cold. Every member who entered walked with caution, as if stepping into a world that could not be touched carelessly. The manuscripts contained notes of the dark days when the Black Death struck, of the number of dead, of villages erased from maps, and of names no longer found in the official records of the kingdom. They wrote with trembling hands, yet never stopped, for memory was their only weapon against the erasure of reality. On the wall was a large circle with strange signs, some resembling stars, others resembling interlinked chains. And in the middle of the circle was a symbol of an eye that seemed to gaze at anyone who dared to enter. No one could say where the symbol came from. Some believed it was inherited from ancestors long before. Others thought it was born of fear and imagination. Yet surely the chamber was never abandoned. They always returned, as if feeling that within it lay the very core of their survival, because that space held secrets only they knew. Secrets that set them apart from everyone else outside. The longer one sat inside that chamber, the more it felt that the atmosphere was not only tied to memories of the past, but also to something greater, as if time within flowed with a rhythm different from the world above. Breaths sounded heavier, heartbeats slower. Even the small flame of a torch often flickered as though struggling against a darkness far denser. On one corner of the wall, there were long scratches forming uneven lines. Upon closer look, they resembled records of the moon's movement and the seasons. Circles connected with tiny dots, and beneath them, dates inscribed that did not match the kingdom's calendar. Some members believed it was a secret chronology passed down, so they would know when to gather, while others saw it as meaningless scrawls written by someone nearly broken under the pressure of the plague. Yet, whether true or not, all treated the marks with respect. None dared erase or alter them, fearing something would break if they did. In the center of the room, a stone table stood, covered with hardened drips of wax collected over decades. On it lay fragments of clay cups and small bones. Uncertain whether from animals or something else, the members rarely spoke of their origin, leaving them untouched, as markers that the place was not to be handled hastily. And the longer they remained in that chamber, the more they felt a quiet force watching. A force that made them feel safe and yet bound to a mystery they could never release. On certain nights when the wind outside carried the scent of damp earth and the distant chorus of insects, the members of the secret society descended again into the underground chamber with careful steps, never arriving all at once, always apart, as if avoiding unseen eyes above. Once inside, they lit their torches and let shadows wander across the stone walls. The crackle of flame against air sounded faint, like a prayer never spoken aloud. Upon the same stone table they placed small objects, one bringing a thread of dark wool, another placing a piece of rusted metal, and another laying grains of white salt. Each seemed trivial, yet every member treated them with solemn respect, as if each item were a key unlocking the next layer of mystery. In the corner of the room, one member carefully recorded upon an animal hide processed into sheets. He did not write names, nor long tales, only signs resembling triangles, circles, and slanting lines. The records stacked with older ones, long preserved, and as the sheets grew, so too did the sense they were assembling something not meant for ordinary generations, but for those willing to face chaos without fleeing it. And every time such a night ended, they left in silence, abandoning the chamber without a word. And above ground, they returned to being ordinary villagers mingling with the crowd. Yet within, they carried the knowledge that another layer of life existed, unseen by outsiders, a layer born from silence, from the wounds of the plague, and from the resolve not to yield to the darkness that had nearly swallowed the world. On a night quieter than usual, when the fog descended thicker than any before, the members gathered once more. Yet this time they did not merely bring small objects. They carried an old wooden box that seemed to have been partly burned, its sides charred, yet still intact. The box was placed upon the stone table, and the silence of the chamber grew heavier, as though the walls themselves were holding their breath in anticipation. Slowly, the box was opened, and within lay a sheet of parchment so fragile it seemed it might crumble at the slightest touch. The writing upon it was faint. No longer clear letters, only overlapping lines, yet each member gazed upon it with reverence. For they believed the writing was not merely notes, but a legacy from an earlier generation who had endured the waves of plague. A legacy not in the form of direct instructions, but a riddle awaiting unraveling. Some members thought the lines formed a map. Others whispered it was a prayer written in reverse. And still others claimed it was nothing more than the scrawls of a mind undone by loneliness. But all agreed to preserve it, to guard it, and to allow it to remain a mystery, not yet hurried toward solution. That night they performed no ritual. No torches were dimmed, no words were spoken. Only long gazes cast toward the fragile sheet, as if witnessing the face of the past still staring back through paper on the verge of dust. Afterward, the box was closed once more, and each member left the chamber with heavy steps, carrying the sense that something greater awaited ahead. Something unimaginable, yet compelling them always to return. A few days after the box had been closed again, the small town that sheltered them began to feel different. Not because of any sound or visible event, but because of an unseen atmosphere, as though the air itself had grown heavier. People in the streets often glanced toward the old building where they gathered, as if sensing something was awake within. Though none dared to approach, in the following nights, several members began to share the same dream, a dream of a long corridor with no doors, its walls covered in faint markings resembling the scratches upon the fragile parchment. They spoke of these dreams in flat tones as though by coincidence. Yet within each of them stirred the feeling that the dreams were not ordinary. They were like an invitation, or perhaps a summons. One member attempted to redraw the lines of the parchment upon the earth with white chalk, and strangely crows circled above, loud and restless. As though disturbed by the shapes, another member interpreted the lines as directions toward the northern forest, a place seldom touched, for it was known to be filled with marshes and thick mist. They whispered among themselves, uncertain whether to follow this vague clue or to keep guarding the box undisturbed. The nights seemed longer, time slower, and the shadows upon the walls of their chamber began to appear as if moving, even though no flame flickered. That strange sensation bound them ever more closely to the ancient parchment, as if the fragile sheet were not merely an object, but something alive, watching and waiting for them to make a decision. In the end, curiosity overcame hesitation. On a night thick with fog, they decided to leave the town in secret, carrying only the tightly rolled parchment, white chalk, and a few oil lanterns. The path toward the northern forest felt long and desolate. Only the echo of their footsteps resounded among trees that loomed like black walls. The mist was so dense that the lanterns revealed only a few steps ahead. They followed the lines interpreted from the symbols on the parchment. As if the path had been real and waiting all along, the air was damp, the ground wet beneath their feet, and at times the sound of unseen creatures stirred around them. The deeper they went, the stronger the feeling that they were no longer walking through a mere forest, but entering a space not entirely belonging to this world. Some members grew dizzy, others felt their bodies heavy, as if the mist itself clung and restrained them. In the midst of the journey, they found a large stone, its surface covered in strange carvings resembling the marks of the parchment. Only far clearer and deeper, the carvings seemed to await a touch. When one member placed his hand upon it, a faint glow seeped from the grooves, making the surrounding fog swirl as though drawn into the earth. At that moment, they all fell silent, realizing the journey was not a coincidence, but something long prepared. Something that made them wonder if the town they had left behind would be the same when they returned, or if perhaps they themselves would never return at all. Before the glowing stone, they felt time move in a different manner. Seconds no longer seemed linear, but expanded and circular, making each breath echo upon itself. An old man who was usually silent began murmuring in a low voice, as if recalling a prayer or ancient chant he had never learned. The words flowed on their own, forming a rhythm that merged with the faint light, and each time he spoke them, the fog swirled faster, then calmed again, as if the forest were listening. The youngest woman in the group saw something within the stone's carvings. not just lines, but shadows that resembled faint faces, perhaps from the past, perhaps from the future. No one knew. Fear and serenity blended into one. They did not know whether they were opening a path to knowledge or to ruin. But one thing was certain. The secret, born from the chaos of the Black Death, had become something far greater. No longer merely a way to survive, but a new society that bound itself to mystery. Rooted in fear and grew within darkness that night, they realized the journey, begun with curiosity, had now transformed into a covenant, an unspoken agreement, and with that, they gazed at the thinning fog, waiting for what would reveal itself before them. Though in the quiet of their hearts, each wondered if there was a price yet to be paid. In the end, as dawn crept slowly behind the forest, still shrouded in mist, the group no longer sought answers. They simply sat in silence, letting the morning chill cover their bodies. And the gentle light of the first sun revealed the last shadows of night. They realized that no secret could ever truly be possessed. Only touched for a moment and then gone, like dust drifting in a pale ray of light. The secret society they had formed had never desired glory or recognition, only a space to understand uncertainty, to nurture fear until it softened into calm, and to gaze upon the world with eyes no longer demanding answers, only accepting that some things would forever hang in the air without end and without certainty. When the bell of the village far in the valley rang faintly, they rose one by one, walking unhurriedly, leaving behind the glowing stone that now dimmed. And not one of them looked back, as if all that had happened was only a long dream slowly dissolving into sleep. Along the narrow path back to ordinary life, they carried nothing but faint memories of light and mist, something they might one day tell to children, or perhaps keep as their final secret, and thus the tale ends like a bedtime story never fully finished, leaving the mystery to dwell in silence, suspended between night and morning, like a soft whisper guiding anyone who listens into slumber.